Hello and welcome to the Beatport podcast. My name's High Class Filter, and for the next hour, I'll be running you through some of the best in new D&B and bass music. My guest on today's show is a self-confessed devotee of sound system music, Unit. With a sound that takes equal cues from the worlds of jungle, drum and bass, footwork, dubstep and beyond, Unit has released on some of bass music's most innovative labels, from Metalheads to Astrophonica to Terror Rhythm, as well as his own Cosmic Bridge imprint. I caught up with Unit in the run-up to the release of his new Violet EP, a self-release collection of 4 160 BPM steppers. Before we get into the interview, I'm starting you off with Righteousness, the lead track from Unit's new EP.
Beatport podcast.
Righteousness, we are light and we
You're listening to the Beatport podcast with me, High Class Filter, and right now I'm joined over the phone by Unit. How's it going?
Very well, sir. Thanks for having me in.
So, how's 2019 been for you so far?
Yeah, really good, man. Sort of coming off the back of the last year, kind of was in Australia and New Zealand over New Year's and Christmas, and just got back in studio, finishing up a few bits and pieces for this year, and obviously about to drop this new EP as well. Yeah, things are looking healthy, man. Like the label's looking good, booking up and stuff, and life is all right, man.
So you just mentioned your new EP there, the Violet EP. Can you tell us a bit more about the release, how it came about, and the inspiration behind the tracks?
Yeah, Violet is basically 4 tracks. They're all 160, so they're kind of, it's 160 BPM. They're kind of experiments. To me, they're kind of like sound system tunes in a way, but they're reflecting on some of my favorite elements from things like Broken Beat and Jungle and some of the 90s stuff, almost like sound system steppers vibe. So it's just me cross-pollinating influences and stuff and seeing what comes out. I think the overall aesthetic, I was kind of going for almost a bit of a vintage feel, and I think it worked quite well. You know, to me, it doesn't sound exactly like many things that have been out there recently in that field as well. I think it's basically returning to what I was doing 5-6 years ago, picking up from there, really.
Expanding on that a bit, can you tell me about some of your biggest influences on your work as Unit and how they all converge together, because there's such a wide range of sounds that make up Unit?
I couldn't tell you exactly how, mainly because I don't really know. It's not something I do that consciously, but having done music and made music for over 20 years, you know, most of that as just a hobby without the professional pressure. To cut a long story short, just really soaked up loads of different ideas and sort of tried things. And I think I kind of hear similarities between things that maybe isn't obvious to some people. In terms of actual, you know, sort of pinpointing influences, I mean, I think UK music in general, from the sound system influence to 90s rave culture, was what I grew up with, and into the zeros, kind of, things like broken beat and early dubstep and garage, and like most people in England, we're just kind of like this melting pot, right? So I've just kind of kept my ears open, really, I think, and tried to do my own reflection on these different elements of sounds that have come and gone,
As someone who makes such a wide range of music, can you tell me a bit about your approach to production? Say, for example, on the new EP, was that something where you were making this EP and it was a case of, I want something that's going to sound like this and the EP will flow like this? Or do you just kind of go into the studio and see what happens?
Well, I don't know if I'm that broad. I think there are people that do a lot more sort of broader stuff under aliases and whatnot. I certainly, I've never really put out house music or techno. But having said that, there's obviously versatility amongst that. I think that I like to kind of pinpoint projects as having a certain aesthetic and use that as a sort of disciplined approach. Like Violet to me was like, this is going to be 160 stuff. And what can I do in that framework that maybe I haven't done before, or what can I sort of bring out? This whole last year I've been listening to loads of really dubby music, everything from King Tubby to Rhythm and Sound to kind of more obscure stuff, labels like Boca Versions in Bristol, and basically kind of reflecting on some of the techniques that people do and kind of taken away with the sort of dub thing. So on that whole record there's loads of spring reverb, for example. So it's just a vibe. And then you kind of follow it, and these tracks made themselves super quickly, so I just kind of let them happen. But yeah, I definitely had this thing of like, okay, I want to do 160 and I want to include X, Y and Z elements and see what I can do with it.
So do you try and limit yourself in the studio in that sense of saying, what can I do within this bracket at one given time?
That's why I've got these aliases, right? So the Mahakala alias at the moment is me just trying to do full-on like jungle stuff. And then I've got the Philip D. Kick thing, which is more footwork influenced, hardcore and jungle as well. Those two things are very separate in my mind. Having done those things and kind of set those things up, it lets me, in a way, the OMUnit thing just be more open-minded and kind of broader. And having these kind of mental, compartmentalized approaches to it, it helps. And I can understand why people like Zinc done this thing where they've shifted into different aliases and stuff. And I find it really useful, at least mentally anyway. Trying to deal with that existential crisis, sort of like, who am I as a creative person? Which is a very privileged position to be in, actually, as a creative person. I think some people are very defined by everything from class to upbringing to kind of immediate influence. I think I've managed to avoid being snagged by too many cultural things that kind of keep me free as well.
You mentioned your Philip D. Kick alias there.
Yeah.
And originally that was set up to put out free downloads, wasn't it? It was kind of jungle edits.
That's right, yeah.
And then last year you revived the alias after 5 or 6 years, was it?
Yeah, 5-6 years or so.
I think when you were originally putting out stuff as Philip D. Kick, you kind of drew a line under it, didn't you? So I was curious to know what made you decide to revive the alias and start putting out originals under that name as well.
There was a lot of hype back in like 2012 or so. People going on about jungle footwork being this kind of cool thing. So I was just like, nah, this is not what I signed up for, I mean, it was essentially just an experiment, and it's amazing. Sometimes, a good idea sort of spawns other things, and I think that was awesome. I didn't want to be too kind of like pegged down by that at the time. I don't know what happened. I think I just woke up one day and I was like, I want to make some more Philip stuff, because I wanted to just do straight up, like, just chop up some jungle breaks and just go back to that place again. And I was like, well, if I do another alias and I'm going to end up with one of these fuckers that's got like 10 aliases, I'm just like, let's, just use Philip, and like, it'll be an interesting kind of surprise for people. But it was very natural. It wasn't sort of like, I'm going to jump back on the Phil thing, for my career's sake or something. It was very much just a natural thing. And I'll probably do some more Philip stuff in future. It's I just wanted to make that stuff again, and it just felt right to say, you know what, this is Philip. And I think it worked. I think people were like really appreciative to actually have like an original bunch of tunes that actually came out. There was vinyl and everything, and so I got a big up Fracture and Astrophonica for supporting it as well. But as I said at the time, the hype died down. The jungle footwork thing had kind of been and gone, and it just felt like it was easier just to do some stuff after time. I don't like capitalizing on hype just for career's sake. And I've watched other people do it, and it's sort of like, it always feels contrived, and talking about strategies and whatnot, things have to be more organic, just natural for me.
So keeping on the topic of pushing things forward, but also being informed by the past, like with your jungle influences, can you tell me a bit about your studio setup? Do you bring in much in the way of hardware or analog equipment, or is it a mostly software-based approach?
I mean, I've got like a mixture, man. Like, I think the days of these things being a duality, you know, are you either hardware or software, are very much over. So I've got stuff that's, some of it's 90s, some of it's really new as well. And so I'm just looking at the stuff now. I'm in my studio today. I've basically got, you know, like 90s sound modules, which have got like certain textures which are very synonymous with certain sort of tropes from the 90s. And then, yeah, I've got like the latest kind of software as well. So I just kind of bring it all together, like exactly that, you know, like what you said. There's just certain things you just can't really replicate, and you just have to go to the original source.
Yeah, have you got any examples of equipment that you use that would kind of exemplify that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's the Roland JB2080, which is like a staple sort of the 90s, if you like. And then I've got like an EMI Morpheus, which is like a Z-plane synthesizer, which is just full of really like lo-fi textures and stuff like that. Got the 180s thing here, which is a Yamaha TX81Z, which is like a rack FM synth. You can actually program. It's pretty mad. Got like an emulated 303 and a couple of other bits and pieces that, you know, I'd rather keep secret. But yeah, just kind of, you know, like classic stuff. I mean, it's nothing that most people don't have either. I mean, a lot of people got one version of the old Roland sound modules and stuff. My pride and joy is this Dave Smith Oberheim collaboration. It's the OB6, which is an analog polysynth, which I'm writing loads of stuff on now. I think it's good to kind of just pick from this and that. I think it's kind of awesome that companies like Roland are doing these kind of cheap emulations of stuff. You know, people are getting ridiculous prices for some of these analog synths. So I'm curious about some of this new gear that's kind of like a twist on the past, you know?
Yeah, I feel like it can get quite easy to be bogged down in the nostalgia of having classic equipment without really thinking about why you would use it.
It is exactly that. It's why, you know, why do you have that thing? I've heard some great records recently which are like, they sound like people trying to be the past. I get what people are going for, the lo-fi thing, but there's some 90s stuff that still sounds super clean and hi-fi because it was just mixed well, you know? So there's a fine line between sort of nostalgia for nostalgia's sake. I think why limit yourself to retro? Moving
on to your move to Bristol. You've been based in Bristol for, is it a couple of years now?
Coming up to 4 years now.
For me, being someone who's based in London, more and more you hear Londoners compare London's music scene to Bristol's and sort of hold it in very high regard in terms of all our clubs are closing, but things are really great in Bristol. Is that something that you see as accurate at all?
No, I think we both know it's not accurate. But, you know, again, on the nostalgia tip, I think Bristol has this unbreakable reputation. However, because of the influx of people like myself coming from outside, Bristol is suffering. There's been a bunch of places that were very important have closed, and certain places are under threat. I mean, we now have Blue Mountain and Lakota potentially both going. Blue Mountain, I think, is already on the verge of closing. Those are one of the two most important clubs in an area of Bristol called Stokes Croft, which is now being completely redeveloped. You know, once these places go, the kind of character of a place can suffer. I actually moved here. I wanted some space to actually, you know, for personal reasons, to kind of like get my thing together and kind of to grow as a person. And I felt like London wasn't allowing me to do that. It was just too much stress, man. So Bristol is above and beyond the music side of it. I think places like Bristol, and there are other places too, similarly have more of a laid-back approach to life, if you like, in a different pace. They allow people perhaps more space to kind of explore themselves and kind of express differently. Whereas I think in London, as much as you have a lot of drive, maybe because of the need to survive and earn money and stuff, it could just feel a bit hectic and a bit hustly. So I think that the attitude in Bristol generally is very much like much more laid back. People are just more open, kind of talkative. Maybe, you know, you can, I don't know, there's not that London thing of like it's scary to talk to strangers. You know, we don't have that sort of thing so much. I've certainly enjoyed deprogramming the London out of me.
So if we're saying, as I think, you know, it's probably the case across the UK, that we're losing club spaces. Do you have any thoughts on how that will affect electronic music as a whole? Do you think the music that's being put out will change as a result of that?
But I mean, possibly. I hesitate to kind of predict the future. It doesn't exist yet, right? There's kind of a doctrine, you know, all the venues are closing. So it's sort of like almost cool to be like, yeah, man, it's terrible. And kind of like, you know, kind of signal that on the internet. But at the same time, I think there are other ways of showing support. I think it really goes from the ground up. I think it's about just spend a little more money in a record shop, or support an artist via their Bandcamp. Just buy the digital, just put a couple of quid in here and there. And I think that, in terms of venues, until there are regulations in place, we also have to show huge amounts of support, I think, above and beyond just sharing information and complaining about it. I think that more needs to be done in terms of writing to local MPs, putting pressure on local government. Ultimately, we pay their wages. There are things like you can oppose on planning permission for new buildings online. I'll give you two examples actually of like recent successes. One is the Bristol Exchange, the Exchange Club in Bristol, which is mostly kind of alt rock and indie, but we can learn a lot from them in the electronic community. These guys, they offered shares in the venue, so they sold, I think it was like £5 a share or something like that, and they basically sold the venue to the public. So now there's like thousands of people that have got shares in the venue. So the venue itself is public owned. So I think legally it puts it in a different category. Essentially, they're protected from development, and I think gives them a lot extra kind of like pulling power, or when it comes to things like redevelopment and kind of issues like that. Another one is Trinity Club, one of the most important venues in Bristol, especially for things like sound system music. And you've got Deep Medi there. Just basically, big sound system events. Been going there for like at least, I think, 20, 30 years, probably more. And there was planning permission that went up for people to build flats literally across the road. And we all know how that goes, right? People with money move into the flats, they start making a fuss, and the council, for whatever reason, and this is nationwide, they just fold. I don't know whether they're in the pockets, or they've got pals that are property developers. I don't know what the deal is, but it seems to be a regular occurrence where you basically get people who, for whatever reason, don't have the wherewithal to actually realise that they're moving into somewhere that's next to a club. And I think there's different solutions, but what happened is there's been more than 2,000 opposing letters on the council website, so that has to count for something, And I think the issue is a lot of people, especially young people, feel a bit powerless, and rather than just sort of complaining about it and being seen as someone who cares, I think that there should be a little more attention paid to like, what can you actually do? I mean, like if an MP receives like 1,000 letters, that counts for something. They are going to go, okay, there's something here. And ultimately, it is cynical. A lot of politicians, they essentially will see that as leverage for voting, for votes and popularity, but it might mean that they actually might get off their arse and do something.
I was curious about your unit Alias itself and the name of your label, Cosmic Bridge. Is there a kind of unifying story or theme behind those names?
I've historically enjoyed and been curious about, spiritual traditions. So the sound is something really ancient in terms of human existence, and it is basically the sound of creation or a sound associated with manifestation. And a unit is a single person. To me, it's just creativity coming through a person. It's a very kind of esoteric way of saying something quite simple. And I don't know, it's just something I picked, years ago, and it's just kind of stuck. And I think, I'm just rolling with it. But in the Cosmic Bridge, I mean, again, and I've said it before, it's almost like just uniting heaven and earth, if you like, or just to put it less kind of grandiose. It's basically, weighty music that has a kind of etheric energy about it as well.
So on that point of just rolling with things and not having a plan with where you're headed with things, looking back on the last 10 years, which have been quite varied in sound, like kind of, as you say, within bass music, but I think what you were putting out in 2010, 2011 was very different to probably what you're putting out now. Is there any releases or moments in your career as unit that you see as like the most defining releases?
Yeah, 2013, that album Threads. The first album was always a special one, I think. It's not the first album I put out, but it certainly felt like the first album that I felt really like I could really get behind. It felt like something it was a culmination of a lot of things. So yeah, Threads was a big one. I think that the Aeolian EP as well, which came before that, definitely did big things for me in terms of people noticing. So I have to give it up to Civil Music for that, actually, and my manager Mark Shelley, who's been with me all the way. I mean, the Metalheads thing was cool because that was like, I guess, like a sort of a life-defining thing. It was like a kind of affirmation of stuff I wanted to do as a kid. I mean, I was really into jungle in the 90s as a kid and making it back then too. And for me, actually, it was like an homage to them as a label and as a kind of, a cultural movement or whatever. It was like, here's my offering. So they've all had, all the albums, every record really has some sort of significance in a different way. But then more recently, I think the Self record was like, me kind of reinventing a bit, moving to Bristol, really going into a lot of personal stuff and, kind of channeling a different energy. I think the Torchlight trilogy had a kind of similar vibe where it was like trying to experiment with different things around 160, similar to Violet really, but perhaps a little more prototype. Yeah, everything's got its own meaning, so it's kind of hard to pick favourite moments. But if I had to pick one, it would be Threads.
So finally, to wrap up, what have we got coming up this year? You were mentioning to me earlier that you got some big stuff coming up with the label Cosmic Bridge this year. Yeah,
we've got some releases kind of locked in. I can't really talk about at the moment. One is, I will say, there's a really amazing compilation that I'm really proud of that I've curated that's coming soon-ish. But mostly, the biggest news we have is we're going to be touring in the States. When I say we, I mean it's myself, More Sounds, and DJ Mad. And we're going to be doing 6 shows in March over the course of about 10 days. And we're bouncing around. So we're doing New York, Boston, and then we go to, we're in Denver. We're going to be in San Francisco and Washington DC as well. So that's going to be awesome, and we're locking in stuff for later in the year, a couple of festivals, bits and pieces, so stay tuned for that as well. Yeah, it's interesting times in Europe for sure, and so we're getting a lot, not more, but kind of like we're getting good support in America, so I want to kind of play to the fans out there and see what we can build. Great.
Well, thanks very much for talking to me. It's been a great chat, and the Violet EP is available now.
That's right, yeah, go get it, self-release. No specific label, just a double 10-inch vinyl if you can find it. It's already sold out a couple of weeks ahead of release date. But yeah, the digitals are out. It's going to be on Beatport for sure.
Nice one. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome, mate.
Beatport Podcast.
Thanks again to Unit for taking the time to chat to me. His Violet EP is out now. For the rest of the show, I'll be getting into the mix with some of my favourite drum and bass and 160 drops of recent weeks. Starting with this, it's a track called Fire Burning by Pablo Dread and comes courtesy of one of my favourite labels right now, Beat Machine Records. This is a new track from the mysterious Tirana, taken from their Acrid EP, out now on Homemade Weapons label, Weaponry. It's always great when a new label hits the scene, and if this track is anything to go by, Mask Music is definitely a label to watch. This track's called Exit Plan, and it comes from the first release on Mask Music from Dubshun. That's all I've got time for on this week's podcast. Another big shout out to Unit for coming on the show today, and remember to go check out his new Violet EP, out now. I'm leaving you with a new track courtesy of an anonymous producer. There's been a lot of speculation about the identity of this artist, but all we know is the track's called Doc001 and it's out now on Solvent Records. For the last hour you've been listening to the Beatport podcast with me, High Class Filter. I'll be back soon with another special guest interview and loads more new music. Catch you next time.
Beatport Podcast.
I will never, 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 never,